In Miami, where luxury and struggle meet under the same tropical sky, $1,000 bet was about to change two lives forever. But not in the way you might imagine. This is the story of Isabella Cruz, a waitress with an unfinished diploma and a heart of steel. And of Ethan Valdez, a tycoon who would learn that there are things money can't buy, and that some lessons cost far more than any amount. At Luna Del Mar restaurant in the heart of Miami Beach, fate was about to serve a dish no one had ordered. The night began like any other, but it would end with words that would echo for weeks. Get ready, because this story will show that the greatest fortune isn't in safes. It's in something called dignity. The Luna Del Mar dining room gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected the gold of the glasses and the deep blue of the ocean through the windows. Isabella Cruz held the tray tightly, her steps measured between the tables where executives sealed million-dollar deals. She knew that world intimately, but she wasn't part of it. Not anymore. At 28, carrying that tray was the price of keeping Mateo in school and keeping hope alive. Each night, there was a small battle against the memory of who she could have been. Table 12 was different that night, noisier, more arrogant. Ethan Valdez occupied the head chair like someone born to own the world. 38 years old, with a strong jaw, a watch that cost more than a car. He laughed too loudly, gestured with his Cuban cigar, and looked at the waiters as if looking at furniture. Isabella had served men like that hundreds of times. But something about him bothered her more. Maybe it was the way his eyes didn't see people, only moving shadows. As she approached to take her order, Ethan interrupted her before she could speak. "Wait a minute, dear. Do you speak English?" The question was laced with sarcasm, and the men around her were already starting to laugh. Isabella took a deep breath. She had learned to swallow even the most humiliations. "Yes, sir. I'm fluent. What would you like to order?" But he wasn't interested in ordering anything. He was interested in a show. $1,000, he announced, pulling out his wallet. $1,000 if you serve me all night in English, without missing a word. The entire room seemed to freeze for a second. Camila Rivera, the 33-year-old maître d' who had become the older sister Isabella never had, watched from the entrance with her fists clenched. She knew that look on Isa's face. It was the same one she got when the electricity bill was late, when Mateo needed new books, when the weight of the world got too much. But there was something else in that look now. Something Camila rarely saw. Anger. Pure and controlled. Isabella placed the tray on the sideboard with calculated delicacy. Her every movement was precise, elegant. She smoothed her black apron, smoothed her dark hair into a neat bun. Then she turned to Ethan with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. $1,000 is a generous offer, Mr. Valdez, she said, her perfect pronunciation cutting through the air like sharp glass. The men around her stopped laughing. "But before we proceed, I need to ask you something. Would you like to start with the wine list?" she continued, her voice low but clear enough that every word reached not only Ethan, but every table around. The room was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. "Or should I start teaching you some manners first?" The air left Ethan's lungs as if he'd been punched. His eyes widened. The open wallet in his hand looked ridiculous now. Pathetic. Isabella didn't wait for an answer. She snatched the tray back and walked away, leaving $1,000 on the table, and a broken man in the chair. Camila approached the table with impeccable professionalism, but her eyes were blazing in Ethan's direction. "Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to show respect to our staff, or I'll have to ask you to leave." Her voice was firm, but Ethan barely heard her. He was fixated on Isabella's silhouette disappearing toward the kitchen. Something had happened. Something he couldn't name. For the first time in years, Ethan Valdez felt ashamed, and he didn't know how to deal with it. The executives around him tried to resume the conversation, make jokes, minimize the awkwardness, but Ethan didn't respond. He twirled his whiskey glass between his fingers, staring into the amber liquid as if it held the answer to the strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't wounded pride. It was something worse. It was the recognition that, for a moment, he had been exactly the kind of man he always despised in others. And a 28-year-old waitress had held a mirror in front of him, a mirror he didn't want to look into. When he asked for the check, Ethan left $3,000 on the table. No explanation, no apology. He simply got up and left, under the watchful eye of every person in the room. But before he walked out the door, he glanced back one last time. Isabella was back in the room, serving another table with the same grace, the same dignity, as if nothing had happened. And it was in that moment that Ethan knew. This woman had just changed something inside him, and he had no idea what was coming next. The silence that fell over Luna Del Mar after Isabella's response was louder than any music. Diners stared at their plates, their glasses, anything but table 12. Ethan Valdez tried to laugh. It was a pathetic attempt to regain control. But the sound that emerged from his throat died before it could take shape. Because there was nothing funny there, just the naked truth, and the truth, he was discovering, hurts more than any physical blow, especially when it comes from someone you've tried to humiliate. Executives around him began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. One cleared his throat. Another pretended to check his cell phone. The third simply stared at the plate of carpaccio as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. No one knew how to react when the king was dethroned in front of everyone. Ethan felt the weight of every look, of every silence. He, who had always commanded entire rooms with a gesture, was now cowering in his own arrogance. And the worst part was, he couldn't stop looking at where Isabella had gone. Camila Rivera watched everything from the Metro D station with her heart racing. She had known Isabella for 3 years. She had seen the girl serve difficult customers with saintly patience. She had held her hand when the bills didn't add up. She had cared for Mateo when Isa was sick. And never in 3 years had she seen that fire in her eyes, that fierce determination not to give in. Camilla knew what it cost. She knew women like them didn't have the luxury of giving answers like that. But what pride, what absurd courage. The kitchen was in an uproar when Isabella entered. The cooks looked at her as if she'd just slain a dragon. And perhaps she had. "Hermana, are you crazy or brave?" asked Carlos, the sous chef, but there was admiration in his voice. Isabella leaned against the cold tile wall and closed her eyes. Her hands trembled. Only now, away from their gaze, did she allow fear to creep in. Fear of losing her job. Fear of not being able to pay the rent. Fear of disappointing Mateo. But there was something else, too. A strange kind of relief. "I'm not brave," she finally replied, opening her eyes. "I'm just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of swallowing frogs while men like this decide our worth." Carlos put his hand on her shoulder. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Everyone there knew exactly what it was like. But Isabella had done something none of them had the courage to do. She had said no. She had looked power in the eye and refused to kneel. And even if it cost her her job, there was a kind of victory in that. A small, fragile one. But real. Outside the kitchen, Lucia Fernandez, the restaurant's owner, had just been informed of the incident. At 45, she had built Luna Del Mar from scratch. She knew exactly who Ethan Valdez was. She knew the size of his bank account. And she also knew that men like him didn't forget public insults. Her head told her to fire Isabella immediately, nip the problem in the bud. But her heart, the heart that still remembered waiting tables in Hialeah, said otherwise. It said Isabella had done what she never had the courage to do. So Lucia made a decision. When Isabella left the kitchen, Lucia was waiting for her in the hallway. Isa's heart sank. "Ms. Lucia, I can explain. But Lucia held up her hand. "You don't have to. I saw everything. There was a pause that seemed to last forever. You did what was right, but you also did what is dangerous. And now, we will have to deal with the consequences. Together. Isabella felt her eyes burn. She hadn't expected understanding. She had expected a summary dismissal. But there was Lucia, offering something more valuable than protection. She was offering solidarity. Among women who knew the price of holding their heads high in a world that insisted on bowing them down. Outside, Ethan finally got up from the table. He placed $3,000 under the salt shaker. Not a word. Not a dramatic gesture. He just turned and walked toward the exit. But before he walked through the glass doors that led to Ocean Drive, he stopped. He turned his head slightly to the left. And there she was. Isabella, back in the dining room, serving another table, smiling gently at an elderly couple, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just dismantled a powerful man with 10 words. And Ethan realized something that made him shiver. She was stronger than him, infinitely stronger. Because she didn't need power to have dignity. She simply carried it, like a second skin. The restaurant door closed behind him with a soft sound. The warm Miami air hit him like a wall. But Ethan barely felt it. He was trapped in that moment. In that look Isabella had given him. There was no hatred there, no triumph. Just a silent question. Is this who you are? And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Valdez had no answer. Because for the first time, he had seen who he truly was. And he didn't like what he saw one bit. Something had broken inside him, something he didn't know if he could fix, or if he even deserved to try. Isabella managed to finish her shift on autopilot. She smiled when necessary. She took orders. She served dishes. But her mind was miles away. She was in Little Havana, in the 2-bedroom apartment where Mateo was probably already sleeping. She was in the bank account screaming for attention. She was in the college application she'd been filling out and deleting for 3 years. She was everywhere her real life awaited her. Far from the crystal chandeliers, far from men like Ethan Valdez, far from the humiliation she'd turned into victory. But at what cost? When it was finally time to change in the tiny staff locker room, Isabella let her apron fall to the floor. Her legs trembled. She sat on the worn wooden bench and put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford that luxury. Crying was like opening a floodgate she'd locked shut for a long time. Ever since her mother died. Ever since she dropped out of UNAM mid-semester. Ever since she became a mother and father to an 11-year-old boy who didn't understand why life had to be so hard. Crying was a privilege, and Isabella had no privileges. Camilla entered the locker room with 2 cups of Cuban coffee. She didn't ask if Isabella wanted any. She just placed one in front of her and sat down beside her. They were both silent for long minutes. Only the sound of the old air conditioner humming and the distant din of the room. "You did the right thing," Camilla finally said. Her voice was low, weary. "But you also did the dangerous thing. And now we have to see what comes next." Isabella took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, bitter, perfect. "I couldn't let it go," Isabella murmured, staring into her cup. "Not this time. I've accepted so much. I've swallowed so much. But that man looked at me like I was nothing. Like my dignity was something he could buy with $1,000. Her voice shook slightly. "My mother didn't raise me for this. She taught me that it doesn't matter how much you have or don't have. What matters is who you are when no one is looking, and who you are when everyone is." Camilla placed her hand over Isabella's, a simple gesture. But it said everything. "That man will remember you," Camilla said. And there was something strange in her voice. Not quite concern. Not quite relief. Men like him don't forget when someone makes them feel small. But the question is, how will he remember? With anger? Or with shame? Isabella had no answer for that. And she didn't want to. She just wanted to go home. Hold Mateo while he slept. check if he'd done his English homework, plan breakfast with the last of her week's paycheck, live her life away from tycoons and their power games. When Isabella finally left the restaurant through the back entrance, the Miami night was eerily quiet. Ocean Drive in the distance throbbed with music and laughter. But here, in the narrow alley where the employees exited, it was nearly silent. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. A worn bag that had seen better days, just like her. But as she walked toward the bus stop, Isabella felt something she hadn't expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear. It was pride. A small, fierce pride that burned in her chest. She had stood her ground, and that was worth more than $1,000. What Isabella didn't know was that at that very moment, a few blocks away, Ethan Valdez was standing on the balcony of his Brickell penthouse, staring out at the city lights, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, thinking about a woman he'd tried to humiliate who, instead, had taught him his first honest lesson in years. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story. But he knew he needed her. And that need scared him more than any risky business deal he'd ever made. Isabella waited for the bus under the yellow light of the street lamp. Her reflection in the window of the closed shop showed a tired woman, hair escaping from its bun, deep circles under her eyes, uniform marked by the journey, but it also showed something else. It showed a woman who had not bowed. And as the bus screeched to a halt in front of her, Isabella made a silent promise. To her mother, to Mateo, to herself. No matter what came next, she would not be bought. She would not be diminished. She would not be invisible. Even if it meant fighting every day, even if it meant losing. Because some battles are worth fighting, even when you know the enemy has more weapons, more money, more power, because the only thing that truly matters is who you see when you look in the mirror. And Isabella liked the woman she saw. Finally. 3 days later, Ethan Valdez returned to Luna del Mar. But this time he was alone. No entourage, no executives. Just him, a perfectly tailored gray suit, and a weight on his chest he couldn't explain. He asked for a discreet table, near the window, where he could observe. He wasn't sure what he was doing there, or maybe he was. Maybe that was exactly it. Observe the woman who had turned his world upside down with 10 words. Observe and try to understand what was bringing him back to that place. What was bringing him back to her. Isabella saw him enter. It would have been impossible to miss. Men like Ethan Valdez carried presence the way others carry perfume. Strong. Impossible to ignore. Her heart skipped a beat, then raced, then forcibly calmed. She wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her shaken. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. If he was here for some kind of revenge, let him have it. She had already decided she wouldn't bow down. Not to him. Not to anyone. Even if it cost her her job. Even if it cost more than that. Camilla approached Isabella at the gas station. "He's back," she said unnecessarily. They both knew it. "Do you want me to answer?" Isabella took a deep breath. She considered the offer for a second. It would be easier, safer, but it would also be cowardly. And she had spent the last 3 days facing fear. She wasn't going to stop now. "No, I'm going." Camilla squeezed her arm, a gesture of silent support. And Isabella walked toward the table by the window, every step measured, every heartbeat controlled, professional, dignified, untouchable. "Good evening, sir. What would you like?" Isabella's voice was firm, polite, but cold. Ethan looked up from the menu, and for the first time she saw the real him, without the armor of anger, without the filter of humiliation. And what she saw surprised her. He seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. There was something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Tiredness, perhaps, or something deeper. "Empty. Just a coffee," he said. His voice was different, lower, less confident. "Please." Isabella wrote it down. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "I'd like to apologize." She stopped, didn't turn around, just stood there, her back to him, processing those words. Apologize. Men like Ethan Valdez didn't apologize. They justified, explained, minimized. But they didn't apologize. For what exactly? She asked, still not turning around, still turning her back on him. How he'd given her the public humiliation. For everything, he answered. And there was something in his voice that finally made her turn around. For what I said, for what I did, for the way I looked at you. As if you were less, when you're clearly so much more. Isabella studied him, looking for signs of manipulation, of a game, of a trap. But all she found was sincerity, and that scared her more than anger would have. Because she knew how to handle anger. Anger was familiar. But genuine regret from a powerful man? That was unfamiliar territory. "Your coffee will be ready in a few minutes," she finally said. Professional. Distant. Not accepting the apology. But also not throwing it back in his face. Just leaving it hanging in the air. Unresolved. As it should be. Ethan watched Isabella walk away. The same grace. The same poise. Like a dancer who knew every step by heart. He'd come here for answers. But he was leaving with more questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? What had driven her to work at that restaurant when it was obvious her English was too perfect, that her education was too deep, that there was a story there he didn't know, and that for the first time in a long time he desperately wanted to know, not out of idle curiosity, but out of necessity. The need to understand what she had that he didn't. What made her complete while he felt empty. By the time Isabella returned with the coffee, Ethan had already made a decision. A decision he knew crossed lines. That invaded privacy. But he justified it by telling himself he needed to understand. He needed to know. "Thank you," he said when she set the cup down. Isabella just nodded, didn't smile, didn't say anything, just walked away again, professional to the core. And Ethan sipped the coffee slowly, savoring not the taste, but the closeness. The chance to be in the same space as her, even though separated by meters, by classes, by entire worlds, by a chasm he had dug with his own hands, and now he didn't know how to cross. That night, after Isabella left, Ethan made a call to a private investigator he occasionally used for due diligence on business deals. "I need information on someone," he said, and he gave the name. Isabella Cruz. A waitress at Luna Del Mar. It was a violation. He knew it. It was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. But he needed to understand. He needed to know what drove this woman, what sustained her, what made her so unshakable when the whole world tried to break her. And as he hung up the phone, Ethan wondered if he was trying to understand Isabella, or if he was trying to understand himself through her. The answer he suspected was both, and that frightened him more than anything. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this story that will touch your heart. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Discreet, professional, frighteningly complete. Ethan opened it in his brickle penthouse office, the city stretching out like a checkerboard of lights below him. Inside, Isabella Cruz's life distilled into pages. Born in Mexico City. Mother deceased 4 years ago. An English student at UNAM, she dropped out in her 3rd semester. Legal guardian of her younger brother, Mateo, 11. She's been working at Luna Del Mar for 3 years. No criminal record, no significant debts other than the occasional late rent payment. A hard life, but clean. Honest. A fighter. Ethan read every word. Twice. 3 times. He memorized details he shouldn't have known. That she took 3 buses to work. That she worked overtime whenever possible. That Mateo excelled at Little Havana Public School. That she was still paying off her mother's hospital bill. That she'd tried to enroll in the local university twice in the past few years and always backed out at the last minute. because the money wasn't enough, because Mateo needed it more, because her dream always came last. Always. And as he read, Ethan felt something break inside him. He had investigated competitors, business partners, potential investors, always with the same professional detachment. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was life. Real pain, real sacrifice. And he had violated it. He had taken Isabella's privacy and turned it into data, into information, into something he could read and archive, as if it were a contract, as if it were a thing. And the shame he felt was so intense he had to sit down, had to put his head in his hands, had to take a deep breath to keep from vomiting. What had he done? Why had he done it? He told himself it was to understand, to know how to help. But the truth was uglier. The truth was that he had used his power to invade, to control, to possess in some twisted way what he couldn't legitimately have: her attention, her respect, her story. And now, looking at those pages, Ethan saw what he truly was. Not a man trying to redeem himself, but a man reproducing the same patterns: power, control, invasion, only this time disguised as interest, as care, as false redemption. He picked up the phone. He considered calling the investigator, telling him it had been a mistake, telling him to destroy everything. But then he put the phone back, because the damage was already done. The information was already in his head. The violation had already happened. There was no erasing it. There was no pretending he didn't know, that he hadn't crossed that line, and the only thing left was deciding what to do with it. Keep the secret and leave her alone, or confess and face the wrath he deserved. Ethan didn't know. For the first time in his career as a ruthless decision-maker, he simply didn't know. 2 days later, Isabella found out. Not because Ethan told her, but because the universe has a way of exposing secrets. Camilla had a friend who worked at an investigations firm, and you happened to see the file. You happened to mention it. You happened to see the network of women protecting each other in a big city. And when Camilla told Isabella slowly, carefully, trying to soften the blow, Isabella felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. He had investigated. He had delved into her life. He had violated not only her privacy, but her dignity. Again. He had no right, Isabella said, her voice strangely calm. But Camilla knew that calm. It was the calm before the storm, the calm of the volcano before it explodes. He had no right to enter my life like this, to know about Mateo, about my mother, about my abandoned dreams. She stood in the restaurant kitchen, amid the smell of garlic and fresh fish, and all she could feel was anger. Pure anger, justified, cathartic. I'm going to talk to him, now. But he didn't need to, because at that exact moment, Ethan Valdez walked through the front door of Luna Del Mar. Not with his previous arrogance, not with the entourage of executives, but alone. His shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of guilt visible in every line of his face. And when his eyes met Isabella's across the room, he knew. She knew. And there was no going back. No apology could fix it. No amount of money could buy forgiveness. There was only the truth. Naked, ugly, unforgivable. And he would have to face it. Isabella crossed the room like a contained storm. Each step was measured, controlled. But inside her, fury burned with an intensity she had never felt before. When she reached Ethan, she didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She simply said, quietly enough for only he to hear, "You had no right." 4 words. But they carried the weight of 1,000 accusations. My life is not a file for you to study. My pain is not information for you to collect. And you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Ethan opened his mouth. But what words were there for that? Sorry was insufficient. Explanation was offensive. Justification was impossible. So he did the only thing left. He nodded. You're right, he said. His voice was hoarse. I didn't have any, and there is no excuse. None. I violated your privacy, your trust, your dignity, out of the selfish desire to understand something I wasn't entitled to. And if you want to sue me, expose me, destroy me, I will accept it, because I deserve it. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Valdez saw himself completely, unfiltered, unjustified, and it was horrible. Isabella stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation, of performance, of gamesmanship. But all she saw was honesty and genuine regret, and that made her even angrier. Because it would be easier to hate him if he were just a villain. But he was more complicated than that. He was a man who had done something terrible, but who seemed genuinely aware of it, and she didn't know what to do with it. She didn't know how to process this complexity when everything about her screamed for simplicity, for clear justice, for villains and heroes, not for that gray area where people were terrible and remorseful at the same time. "Stay away from me," she said finally. "Stay away from my brother. Stay out of my life. You've done enough damage." And then she turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the room, under the curious gaze of customers and staff. A powerful man reduced to ashes by his own choices. And for the first time since it all began, Ethan understood, truly understood. That power without ethics was just tyranny. That self-interest without respect was invasion. And that he had so much more than he ever imagined, to learn about what it truly meant to be human. The Brickell penthouse had never felt so empty. Ethan stood on the balcony, the city of Miami pulsing beneath him like a living organism. Lights that never slept, life that never stopped. But he felt completely disconnected from it all, like in a glass bubble, able to see, but unable to touch, unable to feel, unable to be part of anything real. He had built an empire. He had enough money to last several lifetimes. But what did he really own? Objects, not people, things, not connections, power, but not respect. And for the first time, it hurt. He walked back into the apartment. Minimalist. Designer. Every piece of furniture costing more than Isabella's annual salary. But empty. So empty. Ethan poured himself a whiskey, then poured it down the sink. It wasn't booze he needed. It was clarity. It was honesty. It was looking at himself without the layers of justification he'd built up over the years. Seeing who he really was. Not what he pretended to be. Not what the world saw, but what existed when all the masks fell away. And what he saw terrified him. He pulled out his laptop, opened a blank document. He began to write. "Dear Isabella," he erased it. "Miss Cruz," he erased it. "I have no right to write this," he erased it. How do you apologize for violating someone's essence? How do you put into words the acknowledgement that you crossed every line? That you used your power in the most cowardly way possible? That you turned a person into data? Into an archive? Into a thing to be studied and catalogued? There were no words. There was no letter. There was no apology that was sufficient. And yet, he wrote, erased, rewrote, for hours. The sun began to rise over Biscayne Bay. Gold and pink tinged the sky. A new day dawned with promises Ethan didn't feel worthy of. He'd slept for perhaps 2 hours, and woke with an even heavier weight. Because the sun rising meant this was real, that it wasn't a nightmare he could wake up from, that he had really done it, and he would have to live with the consequences, not just external ones, but internal ones. The knowledge of who he was capable of being, and that was worse than any external punishment Isabella could inflict on him. He picked up his phone. He looked at his contacts. How many people could he actually call? How many of those numbers were real friends? People who knew him? People who cared about him beyond what he could do for them? He scrolled through the list. He went through hundreds of names, executives, investors, business partners, event acquaintances. And he realized there was no one. He had isolated his humanity so completely that there was no one left to call when he needed them, when he was broke, when he needed something beyond financial advice or a business opportunity. And this loneliness was so complete he could barely breathe. Isabella's words echoed in his mind. You had no right. So simple, so devastating. Because she was right, and he knew it. He always knew it. Even when he called the investigator, even when he opened the envelope, even when he read every detail of her life, he knew it was wrong. But he did it anyway, because he was used to taking what he wanted, used to the world bending, used to rules being for other people. Not for him, never for him. And now he was paying the price, not in money, but in something much more expensive, in lost dignity, in eroded humanity. Ethan returned to his laptop. This time, he didn't try to write a letter. He wrote a list. All the times he'd misused power. All the times he'd looked down on someone. All the decisions he'd made prioritizing results over people. The list grew and grew and grew until he had to stop. Because if he continued like that, he'd face decades of choices he didn't have the courage to revisit. But something had changed. Something fundamental. He no longer wanted to be that person. He no longer wanted to be the man Isabella had faced. He wanted to be better. But he didn't know how. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He answered without thinking. Mr. Valdez? The voice was young. Masculine. With an accent he couldn't immediately place. This is Diego. I'm a freelance photographer. I have some photos I think you might be interested in. You and a certain waitress. In the rain. Interesting angle. It looks almost romantic. I thought you might want to buy them before I offer them to the tabloids. And Ethan felt his stomach churn. Not with fear, but with anger. Not for himself, but for Isabella. Because this would affect her. It would expose her. And he couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. How much? Ethan asked, his voice icy. 50,000. All the photos, negatives, everything. It was blackmail. It was extortion. It was criminal. And Ethan could easily report it. Sue, destroy that photographer. But that would take time, and expose Isabella in the process. 100,000, Ethan replied. But on one condition. You delete everything. Never mention it to anyone. And if I find out a single image was leaked, you'll wish you'd never heard my name. There was silence on the other end. Then a nervous laugh. We have a deal. And Ethan hung up. Knowing he'd just solved one problem, but potentially created others, because now there were photos, evidence of something that didn't even exist, but that the world could interpret as it wished. The first site to publish it was a Miami gossip blog. Billionaire tycoon and mysterious waitress? New romance in Miami Beach? The photo was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens, but unmistakable. Ethan and Isabella on the sidewalk outside Luna Del Mar. Rain falling. She looking at him with an expression that could be read as intense. He looking at her imploringly. The angle suggested intimacy, closeness, romance, when the reality had been confrontation, accusation, a line being drawn. But photos lie, especially when they're trying to sell a story. Isabella saw the photo on Camilla's phone. They were on their afternoon break, reheated coffee and brigadeiros the kitchen had made. And suddenly the screen showed her face, her body, her private life exposed for public consumption. No, she whispered. Her hands began to shake. No, no, no. Because she knew what this meant. She knew how the world worked. She knew that now she would be judged, commented on, transformed into a character in a story that wasn't real. And worse, Lucia would see. And Lucia would have to make decisions. Decisions that would affect Isabella's job, Isabella's survival. Within hours, the story spread. Other blogs picked it up. Social media exploded. Comments ranged from supportive to outright cruel. She just wants money. Classic gold digger. He can do better. She's beautiful. He got lucky. I bet it's fake. Restaurant marketing. Every comment was a stab. Every judgment was a violation. Isabella never asked for this, never wanted this. All she had done was defend her dignity, and now she was being turned into entertainment, into gossip, into something for people who didn't know her to consume with their breakfast. Lucia summoned Isabella to her office late in the afternoon. The room was small, cramped, smelling of stale coffee and yellowed papers. Lucia sat behind her desk, hands clasped, expression unreadable. "Sit down, piss," she said, and Isabella sat down, heart pounding, prepared for the worst. "I saw the photos. I read the articles. And I need to ask you a question. Is it true? Is something going on between you two?" The question was direct, fair, and Isabella answered just as bluntly. "No, absolutely not. That moment was me confronting him for invading my privacy. Nothing more." Lucia sighed, a long sigh, heavy. "I believe you, Isabella. I really do. But the problem isn't what's true. It's what people think is true. And now we have customers asking. We have the press calling. We have a situation that's damaging the restaurant's image." Isabella felt the ground drop beneath her. Here it was, the firing, the end. How would she pay the rent? How would she support Mateo? How would she explain to him that she'd lost her job because a wealthy man decided to make her an object of fascination? "I understand," she said, her voice low, prepared to accept the inevitable. But Lucia held up her hand. "Let me finish. This hurts our image. It hurts you. And it's not fair. None of this is fair. But I also can't pretend it's not happening. So I'm going to give you a choice. You can take 2 weeks off, paid leave. Let the dust settle. Or you can keep working and face the stares, the questions, people's morbid curiosity. I'll support either decision. But you have to decide." Isabella processed the words. Lucia wasn't firing her. She was offering a choice. She was treating her like a person. Not a problem. And Isabella felt gratitude so intense it stung her eyes. "I'll keep going," Isabella said after a moment. "I won't let this get me out of here. I won't let gossip determine my life. I haven't done anything wrong. And I won't act like I have." Lucia smiled. It was a small smile, weary, but proud. "This is my girl. But Isabella, you have to understand. If this escalates, if it becomes a bigger problem, I'll have to protect the business. Not because I want to, but because I have 23 families depending on this restaurant. Do you understand?" Isabella understood. She understood perfectly. The world was like that. Brutal, pragmatic, survival over justice. Always. That night, Isabella returned home later than usual. Mateo was already asleep, his arm hanging over the side of the small bed, his English textbook open on his chest. She tucked him in gently, kissed his forehead, and went into the small living room. She picked up her phone. She looked for the number she never thought she'd use. The business card Ethan had discreetly left the last time he'd been at the restaurant, before everything fell apart. She typed the message. "You need to fix this. You created the situation. Now do something." And sent it. Before she could regret it. Before pride stopped her. Because sometimes you had to swallow your pride and ask the devil for help. Even knowing there was a price, there was always a price. The message arrived at 3 in the morning. Ethan wasn't sleeping. He hadn't slept properly in days. He was in the penthouse office, surrounded by documents, trying to find some way to fix what had broken. And when his phone lit up with Isabella's message, he felt relief and terror in equal measure. She was talking to him, but because she needed to, not because she wanted to. And he immediately understood the gravity of it. She wouldn't ask for help unless it was critical, unless she was cornered. And he had helped build that fence, so he had an obligation to destroy it. That morning, Ethan made 3 calls. The first was to his lawyer. I want action against all the websites that publish those photos without consent. Violation of privacy, defamation, whatever you can muster. The second was to his publicist. Prepare a statement, making it clear that there's no relationship. That Ms. Cruz is a respected professional who is being unfairly dragged into drama she didn't create. The third call was more complicated. It was to the owner of the restaurant group that Luna Del Mar belonged to. Or rather, it had belonged to until a week ago. About that acquisition we discussed, I want to close. Today. The owner, Santiago Marquez, was surprised. Ethan, we haven't even finished the due diligence. Why the rush? Ethan took a deep breath. Because I need to ensure certain people are protected. And I need to do it now. There was a pause. Santiago was smart. He connected dots quickly. Does this have anything to do with that waitress in the news? The one connected to you? Ethan gritted his teeth. She's not connected to me. She's being unfairly persecuted for something I caused, and I'm going to fix it, so yes or no? Sell or no? Santiago laughed. A short, calculating laugh. You pay a premium, 20% above the original offer, and we close in 24 hours. It was extortion. Ethan knew it, but he didn't have time to negotiate. Deal. Prepare the papers. And he hung up. In 24 hours, he would officially own Luna Del Mar, and he could shield Isabella from any internal pressure. But that only solved part of the problem. There was still the public perception. There were still the comments, the photos, the narrative, and he needed to change that. Quickly. Before it caused irreparable damage not only to her reputation, but to her ability to live normally, to work, to exist without being the object of speculation. And he would do whatever it took, even if it meant exposing his own vulnerabilities, even if it meant publicly admitting things he'd rather keep private. The next day, Lucia called an extraordinary meeting with the entire Luna Del Mar staff. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone had seen the photos, read the comments, and everyone looked at Isabella with a mixture of curiosity, pity, and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. Lucia stood in front of the group. I have an important announcement. Luna Del Mar has been acquired. New ownership takes over immediately. Working conditions remain the same. Salaries remain the same. But management is now responding to the new structure. Murmurs ran through the group. Isabella felt her stomach sink. Changes like this were never good for rank-and-file employees. And then the door opened, and Ethan Valdez walked in. Dark suit, erect posture, but without the arrogance of before. With him, an older man carrying a briefcase. Ethan stood in the center of the room. He looked at each person, and when his eyes met Isabella's, there was something there. Determination. Purpose. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan Valdez, and as Miss Fernandez just announced, I am the new owner of this establishment. The silence was absolute. You could hear breathing. And I'm here to make something very clear. There has been speculation circulating in recent days involving my name and that of an employee at this restaurant, Isabella Cruz. He spoke her name carefully, respectfully. I want to state for all of you that this speculation is completely unfounded. Ms. Cruz is an exemplary professional, and any interpretation otherwise is not only wrong, but defamatory, and will be treated as such legally. Isabella was frozen. She couldn't process what was happening. Why was he doing this? Why was he exposing himself like this? Furthermore, Ethan continued, now looking directly at Isabella, I want this to be clear to everyone here, and to anyone externally who might be pushing for change. Isabella Cruz is not going anywhere. She has a guaranteed job at this restaurant for as long as she chooses to stay, and anyone who has a problem with that can talk to me directly. The impact of his words was physical. Isabella felt as if she'd been punched. He was using his power, but this time to protect, not to control, to build up, not to diminish. And she didn't know how to feel about that. The meeting continued with operational details, but Isabella barely listened. She was processing, trying to understand the game. Because men like Ethan always had an angle, always had an interest. No one did anything for free, especially not when it involved millions of dollars to buy an entire restaurant. When the meeting ended and people began to disperse, Isabella stayed behind. She waited until only she and Ethan remained in the room. Camilla stood at the door, present, but respectfully distant, ready to intervene if necessary. "Why did you do this?" Isabella asked. Her voice was low, controlled, but thick with emotion. "Buying the entire restaurant, exposing me publicly as a protected employee. Why?" Ethan stared at her, and for the first time there was no barrier between them. Just naked honesty. "Because I created this problem. Because my initial arrogance led to this. Because you didn't deserve any of this. And because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because I need to start doing the right thing, and protecting you seemed like the right place to start." Isabella studied his face, looking for lies, manipulation, but all she found was sincerity. And that scared her, because it was easier when he was just plain villainous. "I don't need saviors," Isabella finally said. The words came out harsher than she intended. "I don't need you to use your money to protect me. I've survived this far without you, and I'll continue to survive, with or without your protection." And then she turned, walked toward the exit, leaving Ethan standing there, with his grand declaration, his heroic gesture, his money and power, and no idea how to truly help someone who didn't want to be saved, who just wanted to be left alone, to live her life, on her terms, not his. And as Isabella walked away, Ethan realized something fundamental. He had done everything right, and everything wrong, at the same time, because he hadn't asked her what she wanted. He had just assumed, and even with the best of intentions, he was still treating her like a problem to be solved, not like a person to be respected. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the small apartment in Little Havana, not by regular mail, but by messenger. A man in a discreet suit asked for a signature and disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared. Isabella stared at the heavy envelope, cream-colored paper, sealed with a logo she didn't recognize. For a moment, she considered throwing it away, but curiosity won out. She opened it. Inside, a letter, on Fundación Valdez letterhead, and the first few lines made her heart skip a beat. "Dear Miss Cruz, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for our new scholarship initiative." Isabella had to sit down. Her legs simply wouldn't hold her any longer. A scholarship, full scholarship, to complete her undergraduate degree, at any accredited institution in Miami, with additional living expenses, covering books, transportation, everything. It was exactly what she needed, exactly what she dreamed of, the chance to return, to finish what she started, to become the person her mother always believed she could be. But it came from Ethan, and it contaminated everything. It turned a gift into a debt, opportunity into a chain, freedom into a gilded prison, and she didn't know if she could accept it. Mateo came home from school and found her still sitting, letter in hand, a lost look in her eyes. "Isa, is everything okay?" His youthful voice, not yet completely changed, brought her back. Isabella looked at her brother, 11 years old, curious eyes, a whole future ahead of her, and she realized. This wasn't just about her. It was about the example she set. It was about teaching Mateo that pride had limits, that sometimes you accepted help, even when it came from a difficult source, even when it tasted bitter, because refusing out of pure pride was a luxury, and they didn't have luxuries. "It's a letter about a scholarship," she finally said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Mateo jumped, literally jumped with joy. "Really? Isa, that's amazing. You're going back to university? You'll be able to study again?" His genuine joy was like a knife, because how would she explain? How would she say the scholarship came from the man who had humiliated her, who had invaded her privacy, who had bought an entire restaurant seemingly to protect her? How would she explain that accepting it felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for? How would she say no and destroy that smile on Mateo's face? That night, after Mateo fell asleep, Isabella picked up the phone. She called Camilla. "I need to talk to someone, and you're the only person who will understand." Camilla arrived 20 minutes later with cheap wine and expensive empathy. They sat on the tiny balcony, Miami at night buzzing below, and Isabella told her everything. She showed her the letter. She explained the dilemma. And Camilla listened. Really listened. Without interrupting. Without judging. Just being present. Which was exactly what Isabella needed. "Let me ask you a question," Camilla finally said. "If this scholarship came from any other foundation, from any other tycoon, would you accept it?" Isabella didn't need to think. "Yes, of course." Camilla nodded. "Then it's not the scholarship. It's who's offering it. It's your justified anger toward him. It's not wanting to owe him anything. It's not wanting him to have power over you. Even if that power is just the memory of what he helped." Isabella felt the words sink in, hit her core, because Camilla was right, as always. "But what if he's doing this to buy me?" Isabella argued, needing to express her fear. "What if this is just another form of control, more sophisticated, more subtle, but control all the same?" Camilla took a sip of wine. She thought. "So you use his money to free yourself. You accept the scholarship, you finish your studies, you get a better job, and you never need him again. You turn his guilt into your freedom. That's not being bought, mija. That's being smart." And for the first time since the envelope arrived, Isabella smiled. Small, but real. Isabella spent the night awake, staring at the letter, then at Mateo sleeping, then back at the letter, weighing, measuring, calculating not in money, but in dignity, in future, in possibilities. And as the sun began to rise, she had a decision. She wasn't going to accept immediately. She wasn't going to text her thanks. She wasn't going to make it easy for Ethan. She was going to do it right. "I was going to Fundación Valdez. I was going to look into the eyes of whoever ran it. I was going to ask questions. I was going to make sure there were no strings attached. And only then, only after she was sure, would she decide. On her terms, not his." The Valdez Foundation headquarters were in Coral Gables, an elegant building. Not ostentatious, but clearly expensive. Isabella wore her best outfit, a simple white blouse, black pants, shoes she reserved for special occasions. She didn't want to look like she was begging. She wanted to look exactly like herself, a woman considering an opportunity, not a supplicant accepting charity. The difference was subtle, but essential, because it was about how she entered that building and how she would leave. And she would leave with her head held high, regardless of the answer. The receptionist was young, professional. She smiled when Isabella introduced herself. "Miss Cruz, we've been waiting. Dr. Santos will see you in a few minutes." Isabella sat in the waiting room, modern, clean, with photos on the wall of people at graduation ceremonies, holding diplomas, smiling. They were the foundation's previous beneficiaries, different faces, different stories, but all with that expression, hope fulfilled. And Isabella felt something stir in her chest. Maybe this was real. Maybe it wasn't about Ethan, but about something bigger, something that existed before her, and would continue to exist after her. "Miss Cruz?" A woman in her 50s, gray hair tied in a bun and red-framed glasses, smiled from the doorway. "I'm Dr. Mercedes Santos, director of the foundation. Please come." Isabella followed her down a hallway lined with more photos, more success stories, to a comfortable room, not intimidating, with sofas instead of formal chairs, fresh coffee on a small table. "Please have a seat. Would you like coffee?" Isabella accepted. more for something to do with her hands than out of actual desire. And she waited for Dr. Santos to begin the sale, the persuasion, the explanation of why she should accept. But Dr. Santos just sat down. She took a sip of her coffee and said, "You have questions. I can see that, and you should. So ask, without fear of offending, without worrying about seeming ungrateful. This is a conversation between two women, one who manages resources, the other who deserves access to them. Speak up." Isabella took a deep breath and asked the burning question, "Does this have anything to do with Ethan Valdez? With what happened between us? Is this him trying to buy me?" Dr. Santos didn't look away. She didn't hesitate. Yes and no. Let me explain. Fundación Valdez has been in existence for 10 years. I've been directing it for 8. We have clear criteria for scholarships, academic merit, financial need, demonstrated potential. You qualify for all of them. Your UNAM record is excellent. Your circumstances are exactly what we try to support. And your work in keeping your family together while working full-time demonstrates determination, which we value. Dr. Santos paused. Now, it's true that Ethan asked me to review your case specifically, but not to create an opening, to speed up the process. You were already on the list of potential candidates. He just pushed the timeline. Isabella sued. What if I decline? Does that affect others? The foundation? No, absolutely not. Your acceptance or rejection is purely personal. It doesn't affect funding. It doesn't affect other scholarship recipients. It doesn't affect anything other than whether or not you have the opportunity to return to your studies. Dr. Santos leaned in slightly. Isabella, can I be frank? Ethan Valdez is many things, some good, some questionable. But this foundation is independent of him. He funds it, but he doesn't control it. And I wouldn't let any scholarship be used as a tool for manipulation. I'm an educator before I'm an administrator. And my commitment is to students, not to donors. There was a firmness in her voice that Isabella recognized. It was the firmness of a woman who had fought her own battles, and won some, lost others, but never bowed. Isabella felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been holding since the envelope arrived. I don't want to owe him, she admitted. Her voice shook slightly. I don't want every step I take to be marked by forced gratitude, by the reminder that he saved me. I don't want to be his charity project. Dr. Santos nodded, understanding. Then don't be. Accept the scholarship because you deserve it, because you earned it, because your mother would have wanted it, because Mateo needs to see that education is possible. Not because of Ethan Valdez, but in spite of him. Make it what you need it to be, not what he offers. The Valdez Foundation's annual conference was a highly anticipated event in Miami. Donors, scholars, press. Everyone gathered in the elegant ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel. Isabella didn't want to go. She had accepted the scholarship a week earlier, on her terms, with her conditions. But participating in a public event, being paraded as a success story, that seemed too much. It seemed like exposure she hadn't asked for, but Dr. Santos had been gently insistent. It's not about you being paraded, it's about you inspiring others, other Isabellas who think education isn't for them. And how could Isabella refuse that? She was backstage now. A simple dress Camilla had lent her, navy blue, elegant without trying too hard. Mateo was with her, in a suit they'd bought second-hand in Little Havana. He was nervous, excited, proud. You're going to rock it, Isa, he whispered, and she held his hand, small, but growing fast. Soon he wouldn't be a child anymore. Soon he would be a young man, and she wanted him to see that education was possible, that transformation was real, that it didn't matter where you came from, it mattered where you were going, and she was moving forward. Finally, the ballroom was packed. About 300 guests. Isabella could see through the crack in the curtain. There was Ethan, the head table, but not in the center, deliberately to the side, leaving the spotlight to scholarship students, to real stories. He was different today, less imposing, more human. But she wasn't here for him. She was here for herself, for Mateo, for all the other women who work double shifts and still dream of diplomas, for her mother, who didn't live to see this day, but she would be proud. Isabella knew. Deep down, she knew. Dr. Santos took the stage. Microphone, lights, the natural elegance of someone who's been doing this for years. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here to celebrate 10 years of transformation through education. Applause. Polite. Sincere. Today, I'm especially proud to announce the expansion of our program. Scholarships specifically for working women. Women who dropped out of school out of necessity, but who deserve a second chance, and I'm honored to introduce the first recipient. Isabella felt Mateo squeeze her hand. Isabella Cruz. Please come to the stage. Isabella's heart was pounding so loudly she barely heard the applause, but her legs moved. Waitress training, always moving, always graceful, even when the world was falling apart. She climbed the steps, hot lights on her face, stares from 300 people, and for a moment she wanted to run, wanted to return to the safety of anonymity. But then she saw it. In the third row, Camilla, standing, applauding, tears streaming, and Isabella breathed, once, twice, and stayed on the stage, stayed in the light, stayed in the truth of who she was and what she was becoming. Dr. Santos hugged her. She handed the microphone, and Isabella looked out at the crowd, prepared to speak the words she had rehearsed. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was different. It was real. I didn't do anything to deserve this, she said, her amplified voice echoing. My life isn't special. I just wake up. I work. I take care of my brother. I try to survive, like millions of other women. The only difference is that today, someone decided I deserved a chance. And I don't know if I do. But I will honor it, not for the sake of the one who gave it, but for the sake of the one who isn't here to receive it. My mother, and all the other mothers, who sacrificed everything so their daughters could have more. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't a silence of discomfort. It was a silence of witness, of recognition, of shared humanity. And then Ethan stood. He began to applaud, and one by one the entire room rose. A standing ovation for Isabella, for her honesty, for her courage in not pretending she was special, in not accepting narratives of individual heroism, in recognizing that she was here because the system failed. And someone tried to fix a small part of that, not because she was exceptional, but because everyone should have access, and she was simply the lucky one this time. When she stepped off the stage, Isabella went straight to Mateo. She held him and cried. For the first time since the initial humiliation, for the first time since her mother died, she cried. And it wasn't tears of pain. It was tears of relief, of a door opening, of possibility becoming real, and Mateo held her back, his small body trying to be strong for her, as she had always been for him. I'm proud of you, he whispered, and Isabella almost broke again, because those words, of all the words, those were the ones that mattered. Ethan watched from afar. He didn't approach. He knew it wasn't his moment. It was hers. But he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction without ego. Pleasure without possessiveness. He had helped. In a twisted way, imperfectly, clumsy on many levels. But in the end, he had helped. And not because he wanted credit, not because he wanted gratitude, but because it was right. And maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand what it meant to use power correctly, not to control, not to impress, but to open doors, and then get out of the way, let people cross paths on their own merit, and he had a lot, still to learn. But this was a beginning, small, but real. The night continued with speeches, dinners, networking, but Isabella was in a bubble, floating, Mateo by her side, Camilla meeting her during breaks, Dr. Santos introducing her to other scholarship recipients. Similar stories, different lives, but the same struggle, the same determination. And Isabella realized she wasn't alone. She never had been. There was an army of women, fighting, surviving, turning obstacles into stepping stones. And now she was part of it. Officially, with a scholarship, with a chance, with a future that had previously been just a hazy dream, and now it had form, it had a timeline, it had reality, and that changed everything. If you're enjoying this story of resilience and dignity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. 3 days after the conference, Isabella was walking down Ocean Drive. Alone. Saturday afternoon. Mateo was with a neighbor who adored him. And she needed it. She needed time, space, silence unfilled by client requests or bill worries. Just her, the ocean, and the golden envelope she carried in her purse. Official scholarship documents, enrollment confirmation, class schedule, everything real, everything tangible, everything frighteningly possible. And she needed to process it, away from everyone, just with herself, and with the ghost of her mother she always carried. The sea was calm, impossible blue under a late afternoon sky. Tourists took photos. Couples walked hand in hand. Runners sweated under the still strong sun. Life was happening, as it always did, regardless of personal dramas, of individual transformations. The world kept turning, and there was comfort in that. Isabella sat on a bench facing the beach. She took off her shoes. She felt the warm sand beneath her feet, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply be. Not a waitress, not a surrogate mother, not a repentant tycoon's redemption project. Just Isabella, a 28-year-old woman with a complicated past, an uncertain present, and a future that finally had light at the end of the tunnel. "Can I sit?" The voice made her jump. Isabella turned. Ethan was there. Bermuda shorts, casual shirt, sunglasses, no entourage, no corporate armor, just man. And she noticed. He seemed smaller without the suit, more approachable, more human. She considered saying no, considered getting up and leaving, but she was tired of running, tired of anger, tired of carrying a burden that wasn't just hers. "It's a free country," she replied. Not exactly an invitation, but not a refusal. Ethan sat down. He left a respectful space between them. He looked at the sea, not at her, as if he knew she needed distance, even though he was close. They were silent for long minutes, just the sound of waves, seagulls, distant music from some bar, Miami breathing its perpetual life, and strangely, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. It was healing. It was two people who had hurt each other, deliberately or not, simply existing in the same space, without needing to fill the void with words, without needing to explain, justify, defend, just being. And that was rare, precious, unexpected, and frighteningly good. Isabella didn't want it to be good. She wanted him to remain a villain. She wanted to hate simply. But life was complicated, and people were even more complicated. "Thank you," Isabella finally said. The word was heavy, costly, because thanking felt like admitting a debt, admitting he had power over her. For the scholarship, for the foundation, for facilitating the process. Ethan shook his head, still staring out to sea. "Don't thank me. It wasn't charity. It wasn't salvation. You were already on the list. You already qualified. I just sped up. And I didn't do it out of altruism. I did it because I needed to. Because I couldn't sleep knowing I'd contributed to your harm. So no, don't thank me." I don't owe you anything. But I don't owe you anything either. We're even. Isabella looked at him then, really looked, and saw. He believed it. He believed they were even. And maybe they were. Maybe the balance of humiliations and reparations was even. But there was something left, something she needed to say. I don't hate you, she said. The words surprised her as much as they probably surprised him. I should. You humiliated me. You invaded my privacy. You used power in questionable ways. But I don't hate, because you changed too. I saw it. At the conference. In the way you backed away. In the way you let it be about us. Not about you. And that means something. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but recognition. That people can grow, even when they start from ugly places. Ethan finally turned to her. He took off his glasses. His eyes were red. Not from crying, but from suppressed emotion. I don't deserve this generosity, he said. His voice was hoarse. I don't deserve for you to see me as anything more than the villain in your story. Because for a long time, that's exactly what I was. And not just in your story, in many others. I built an empire by stepping on people, justifying it with business logic. With, that's how the world works. But you showed me. You showed me that the world works this way because people like me make it work that way. And that it could be different. If we chose differently. He paused. You gave me a gift I didn't ask for, but I needed it. You gave me a mirror, and you forced me to look, and I'm trying. For the first time in decades, I'm trying to be better, not for you, not to impress you, but because I can no longer be who I was. Isabella felt tears threaten, but she didn't let them fall. She'd cried enough. She'd expended enough emotion. We'll go our separate ways, she said. And it wasn't a question. It was a statement. I'll go back to school, build a career, take care of Mateo, live my life. And you'll do what tycoons do, build empires, do business, live your life. Our worlds touched, briefly, violently, transformatively, but they weren't meant to intertwine, only to collide, and grow from the impact. Ethan nodded. Understanding. Accepting. But with the same lesson, he added. Dignity isn't negotiated, respect isn't bought, and power without humanity is just tyranny. Yes, same lesson. Different paths. They stood, almost simultaneously, as if they knew the conversation was over, that the circle was complete. Isabella extended her hand. Formal, final. Ethan shook it. Firm, respectful, brief. Good luck, Isabella Cruz, he said. Good luck, Ethan Valdez, she replied. And then they walked away. Opposite directions on Ocean Drive. Two strangers who had hurt each other, transformed each other, and freed each other, from narratives, from emotional debts, from justified but corrosive rages, free, finally, to move on with their lives, marked but not defined, by the encounter they never asked for, but which they both needed, in ways they would only understand years later, when they looked back and saw not villains or heroes, but people, complex, flawed, capable of cruelty and of growth, as everyone is when they let themselves be. The conference room at the top of the Brickell building was tense. 6 investors, 3 board members, all looking at Ethan with a mixture of concern and irritation. On the screen, a slideshow, headlines, photos, the narrative that had been building over the past few weeks. Valdez and the waitress. Romance or scandal? Foundation or compensation? The media had taken the story and twisted it, as the media always does, turning nuance into sensation, complexity into clickbait. And now, the men who controlled millions in capital wanted answers. They wanted assurances that their investment wasn't compromised, that their corporate image was intact, that Ethan wasn't becoming a problem. Ethan, you understand our position. Marcus Thornton, a veteran investor with white hair and a $5,000 suit, spoke with forced patience. We're not judging your personal life, but there are implications. Your face is associated with multiple ventures. Scandal affects valuation. It affects negotiations. It affects trust. Ethan listened, as he always had. Years of corporate training taught him to listen, process, respond strategically. But something in him resisted now. Something Isabella had planted. Something that refused to prioritize image over truth, profit over principle, appearance over substance. And that frightened the men at the table. Because a change in leadership always frightens investors. "I understand completely," Ethan replied. His voice was calm but firm. "And I also understand that you have the right to protect your investments. But let me be clear. There was no scandal. There was no romance. There was a woman I mistreated, whom I tried imperfectly to make amends to, and the media turned it into something else. I can issue statements. I can sue for defamation where applicable, but I will not apologize for trying to do the right thing." The silence that followed was icy, because in the corporate world, not apologizing was insubordination. It was prioritizing morality over the market, and that had no place in the boardroom, or at least it shouldn't. Thomas Reeves, another investor, younger but no less aggressive, leaned in. "Ethan, be reasonable. We're asking for a gesture, public distancing from this woman, a statement that the foundation is under review to ensure ownership, something to calm the market, something to show you still have your head in the game." And there it was, the real demand, not an explanation, but a sacrifice. Throw Isabella and the foundation under the bus to save corporate image. And a month ago, Ethan would have done it, without blinking, because it was logical, because he protected interests, because people were always secondary to numbers. But not now. Not anymore. Not after seeing his reflection in Isabella's eyes and hating what he saw. "No," Ethan said. Simple, final. "I won't distance myself from a foundation that does legitimate work. I won't imply impropriety where there isn't. And I definitely won't throw an innocent woman to the media wolves to save percentage points in valuation. If that's unacceptable to you, I suggest you look for other investments, because that's my position, and it's not up for negotiation." The shock in the room was palpable. Mouths dropped open. Looks exchanged. Because tycoons don't do that. They don't choose principle over profit. They don't risk investor relationships for ethical reasons. No. No. Absolutely not. Marcus stood. Slow movement. Deliberate, menacing in its calm. "Ethan, think carefully about what you're doing. We're offering you an easy way out. We're trying to protect you. But if you persist in this stance, we'll have to reevaluate our involvement. And not just us. Others will follow. You'll be isolated. And in a market where capital is king, isolation is death." The threat was clear, veiled as concern, but a threat nonetheless. And Ethan recognized it. He recognized the game, because he'd played it so many times. It had been Marcus at other tables. He'd pressured other executives. He'd used the same logic, the same language, the same coercion disguised as advice. And now he was on the other side. And he understood viscerally what it was like to be pressured, what it was like to have to choose between what's right and what's profitable. "Then reevaluate," Ethan said, standing up as well. He met Marcus's gaze unblinkingly. "Reevaluate. Get out. Take your capital with you. Because I won't compromise the integrity of a legitimate foundation or throw an innocent woman into a negative spotlight to please the market. And if that makes me a bad investment in your eyes, then maybe I don't want to be in business with you anyway." He walked toward the door. "Meeting adjourned. My lawyer will be in touch about necessary partnership dissolutions. Good afternoon, gentlemen." And he left, leaving the room in complete chaos. Raised voices. Disbelief. Anger. But he didn't look back, because looking back would mean doubting. And he couldn't afford to doubt now. In the elevator descending, Ethan trembled. Not with fear, but with adrenaline, with the recognition of what he had just done. He had essentially declared war on key investors. He had risked the financial stability of multiple ventures. He had prioritized ethics over economics, and it was terrifying and liberating and completely insane and absolutely necessary. Because if not now, when? If not for Isabella, for whom? If not on principle, why? And for the first time in his corporate life, Ethan Valdez felt he was on the right side of history, even if it cost him dearly, and it would. He knew that. But some prices are worth paying, because the alternative is to live as he had lived, rich, powerful, and completely empty. And he didn't want that anymore. He couldn't be that anymore. And if that meant losing his empire to gain his soul, then so be it. 2 weeks after the explosive meeting, the consequences began to unfold. 3 investors pulled out. 2 contracts were canceled. A real estate project in Wynwood was put on hold due to lack of capital. Miami's corporate world buzzed with speculation. Valdez is losing control. Valdez business crisis. Investors bail out en masse. The headlines were cruel, exaggerated, but also not entirely false. Ethan was bleeding capital. And more importantly, he was bleeding credibility in circles where credibility was currency. And he knew it. He knew he had started something he might not be able to control, but he also knew there was no going back, only forward, even if forward was a cliff. What Ethan didn't know was that Marcus Thornton wasn't finished. Men like Marcus didn't accept defeat silently. They didn't accept being challenged publicly and simply walk away. They retaliated. And Marcus's retaliation was surgical. He began investigating, not Ethan directly, but people around him, and eventually it reached Isabella. Not her present life, but her past, her mother's death, the hospital debts, and something else, something small. A check Isabella had deposited 3 years ago. An insurance check that was technically irregular, nothing criminal, just poorly handled paperwork. But in the right hands, it could look like fraud. And Marcus had the right hands, and the right lawyers, and the right media, to turn anything into a scandal. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan was in the office reviewing financing options when the phone rang. A private number. He answered. "Ethan, my old friend." Marcus's voice was honey, poison disguised as sweet. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Ethan sat up straighter in his chair, every muscle on edge. "Marcus, I figured I'd hear from you eventually. What do you want?" No beating around the bush. No false courtesy. Just straight to the point. Because men like Marcus didn't call to exchange pleasantries. They called to extract concessions. Straight to the point. I've always appreciated that about you. Very good. I have interesting information. About your protege, Isabella Cruz. Ethan's stomach sank. Go on. His voice was icy. It seems Miss Cruz has a small skeleton in her closet. Insurance irregularities. 3 years ago. Technically, it could be construed as fraud, with the right lawyers, the right media. You understand where I'm going with this. Ethan understood perfectly. How much? He asked, because there was always a price. Always. Oh, I don't want money, Ethan. I want you to come to your senses. Issue a statement we talked about. Distance yourself from her and the foundation. Publicly. And this information disappears. Simple as that. Blackmail. Pure. Blatant. And completely expected. And if I refuse? Then they leak. Everywhere. And she becomes news. Valdez Foundation scholar has fraudulent past. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the impact on her reputation, on the career she's trying to build, on her little brother's custody, because Child Protective Services loves stories like that. Do you really want to put her through this? Marcus paused, letting the threat sink in. You have 24 hours. After that, documents will go to the press and to the relevant authorities. Choose wisely, Ethan. Protect her. Do exactly what I asked. Or destroy her. Be stubborn. Your decision. And he hung up, leaving Ethan alone with an impossible choice. Protect Isabella by accepting blackmail, or protect his principles and see her destroyed. There was no good option. There was no clean exit, only the choice between two types of betrayal, and he had 24 hours to decide. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He spent hours with lawyers, reviewing documents Marcus had sent by messenger. And they were real. The irregularity was real. Minor. Technically insignificant. Any reasonable judge would dismiss it. But in the court of public opinion, with tabloid media, with social services already overwhelmed, looking for reasons to question guardianships, he could destroy Isabella, he could take Matteo away, he could destroy everything she was building, and Ethan held the power to prevent it, simply by bowing, simply by accepting blackmail, simply by betraying everything he had promised to defend. And the irony was not lost on him. He had chosen principle in the boardroom, and now principle was about to cost him, not him. But Isabella, the vulnerable, always paid, always. At 5 in the morning, Ethan made his decision. He called his lawyer. Prepare a complete dossier on Marcus Thornton, every illegal investigation, every blackmail attempt, everything documented, audio recording of yesterday's call, everything. His lawyer hesitated. Ethan, if you do this, you're declaring all-out war. Marcus has connections. He can... I know what he can do, Ethan interrupted. And I don't care. Prepare a dossier and give it to the district attorney's office and the FBI and every relevant law enforcement agency, and prepare a statement for the media, too, explaining exactly what Marcus tried to do and why. He was risking everything, his reputation, his business, potentially his freedom. Because going against Marcus meant going against an entire ecosystem of power. But he saw no alternative. There was no longer a choice between right and wrong, only a choice between being who he was or who he wanted to be. The dossier was delivered at 9 in the morning. At 10, Ethan's phone blew up. Marcus, furious, threatening. Then Marcus's lawyers, then other investors, all demanding a retreat, all threatening consequences. And Ethan listened to every call. He responded with only one thing. Dignity is not negotiable, and Isabella Cruz is not a bargaining chip. Do your worst. I'll wait. And he hung up. And waited. He waited for the storm he knew was coming. Because he had just done something the corporate world would not forgive. He had chosen people over profit, ethics over economics, and he was about to pay the price. A high price. Possibly everything. But for the first time in his life, he was at peace with choice. Isabella found out through Camilla, who found out through the network of women who always know everything first. Ethan Valdez is being investigated for exposing an attempted blackmail against you. Isabella couldn't process it at first. What? Blackmail? Against me? Why? And Camilla explained. Everything. The insurance irregularity. Marcus's threat. The choice Ethan had. And the choice she made. Refuse blackmail. Expose Marcus. Risk everything. For her. On principle. For something bigger than business. And Isabella felt waves of emotion. Anger at being used as a weapon. Fear for what might happen to Matteo. Gratitude that Ethan had chosen to protect her. Confusion that everything was so complicated. And finally, tears. Because for the first time since it all began, someone had truly seen her. Not as a project, not as redemption, but as a person. Worthy of being defended. Even at personal cost, especially at personal cost. She picked up her phone, typed a message to Ethan, deleted it, typed again. Thank you for choosing right. Even when it was expensive, you didn't have to, but you did. And that means everything. She sent it. And waited. A reply came minutes later. You taught me that some things are priceless. Dignity is one of them. It wasn't sacrifice. It was finally understanding what matters. Thank you. For being the mirror I needed. And Isabella smiled, through her tears, because finally, they had reached a place of real understanding, not romantic, not manufactured, but genuine, human, Two people who clashed, hurt, transformed, and came out the other side. Not together, but better. Better separately. And that was all it needed to be. Subscribe to the channel and share this story. We're nearing the end, and you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. 6 weeks later, Luna Del Mar was closed for a private event, a small celebration, end of semester for Fundación Valdez scholarship students, only 20 people, intimate, personal. Isabella was there, not as a waitress, but as a guest, as a scholarship student. As a student who had completed her first semester with exemplary grades. Mateo was with her. He'd grown a few inches, a proud smile every time he looked at his sister. And Isabella was different too, still tired, still a fighter, but with something new in her eyes, hope, real, tangible, planted and growing. Finally, Ethan arrived last, deliberately. He didn't want the night to be about him. He wanted it to be about them, the students, the stories, the transformations. He was thinner. The last few weeks had been brutal. Investigations, depositions, loss of more investors, complete restructuring of an empire that took decades to build. But there was also peace in him. Peace that hadn't existed before. Peace in knowing he had done the right thing, even when it cost him dearly, especially because it cost him dearly, because sacrifice without cost isn't sacrifice at all. It's just an empty gesture, and he had paid, in capital, in relationships, in status, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable, integrity, in himself. When Isabella saw him enter, their eyes met. Across the room, across the people, across everything that had happened, and there was recognition, not of romance, not of debt, but of a shared journey, of lessons learned, of parallel transformations. She waved, small, respectfully. He waved back, and they continued, she chatting with other scholarship recipients. He was being introduced by Dr. Santos to potential donors, each in their own orbit, but aware of the other. Like two planets that almost collided, but found their own orbits, stable, separate, but forever marked by the almost, by the possible, by the path not taken. At the end of the night, when most people had already left, Isabella found herself alone in the dining room. Mateo had gone to the bathroom. Camilla was helping clean up in the kitchen. And she was there, where it all began. Table 12. Where Ethan had offered $1,000, where she had found the courage to respond, where her life had changed, not because of money, not because of salvation, but because of choice, her choice, to not accept, to not bow down, to maintain dignity even when it cost her. And looking at that table now, Isabella felt gratitude, strange, complicated, but real. Because without that moment, without that humiliation, she might never have found strength, never have demanded respect, never have believed she deserved more. And now she did. And she had. And she was building. And it felt good. Penny, for your thoughts? Ethan's voice made her turn. He was leaning against the doorframe. Casual, tired but smiling, small, genuine. Thinking about how everything has changed, Isabella replied. Like that night, at that table, it changed everything, for both of us. Ethan stepped closer. He stopped at a respectful distance. It has. You gave me a gift I didn't ask for, but desperately needed. You showed me who I was, and forced me to decide if I liked it. And I didn't. So I changed. I'm changing. A process. Not destiny, but a journey. Isabella nodded. And you gave me something too, not the bag. That was a tool. But before that, you gave me anger. Anger I'd been suppressing for years. And anger gave me strength, the strength to demand, to refuse, to believe I deserved respect. So thank you for being a catalyst. Even if you were a terrible catalyst. She smiled. He laughed, small, but honest. We'll go our separate ways, Isabella said, repeating words from Ocean Drive. You in your world, me in mine. These worlds don't naturally blend, and they shouldn't. But for a moment, they collided, and we both emerged transformed. And that's the best resolution possible. Not a fairy tale romance, but real human growth. Messy, complicated, imperfect, but real. Ethan nodded. With the same lesson, he added, dignity is priceless. Respect cannot be bought. And power without humanity is imprisonment. Not freedom. Same lesson. Different paths. But better. Infinitely better. Isabella held out her hand. Not as a farewell, but as an acknowledgement of everything. Of the terrible beginning. Of the complicated middle. Of the respectful end. Ethan shook it. Firmly, warmly, briefly, perfectly. Good luck, Isabella Cruz. You'll do amazing things. I know it. Good luck, Ethan Valdez. You'll be a better man. I believe it. And they let go. And at that moment, Camilla walked in carrying a box. Isa, this came for you. The delivery man said it was urgent. Isabella took it. A small box, wrapped in plain paper. No card, no identification. She looked at Ethan. He smiled, mysteriously. Open it. Isabella opened it. Inside. An old book, worn by time, an English-Spanish dictionary. And when she opened the first page, she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her mother's, a dedication written years ago. To my Isabella, words are bridges, not walls. Use them to connect, never to divide. I love you infinitely. Mom. Isabella held the book to her chest. Tears were flowing freely now. How? How did you find it? Her voice cracked, emotion overflowing. Ethan swallowed, his own eyes moist. I tracked it down. It took weeks. But I found it at an estate auction. I bought it. I kept it, waiting for the right moment. And this seems like the right moment, for you to carry on, to use while you build bridges. Like your mother wanted. Isabella couldn't speak. She just nodded, holding the book like a sacred relic, because it was. It was a piece of her mother she thought she'd lost forever, and Ethan had returned it. Not as a grand gesture, but as a silent restitution. As a way of saying, I understand, I finally understand. What you lost, what you carry, and I want to honor it, not possess it, not control it, but honor it. And it was perfect. More perfect than any verbal apology. Because it was action, not words. It was understanding, not performance. It was human. Finally, completely, wonderfully human. Mateo came back. He saw his sister crying. He ran. Isa? What happened? She held him. Nothing bad, little one. Something very, very good. She showed him the book. And Mateo understood. Because she had told him stories. About her mother. About the dictionary they used together. About nights studying English in the small kitchen in Mexico City. And now she was back. Like a bridge. Not to the past, but to the future. Carrying the past within, as it should be. Thank you, Isabella said to Ethan. Last time, final. Thank you for understanding, finally. Thank you, he replied, for teaching, patiently, even when I was a terrible student. And they smiled. And it was complete, a closed circle. The story ended, not with a kiss, not with union, but with mutual respect, and real transformation, and recognition of their shared humanity. And it was more than enough. It was perfect. It was real. It was life. As it should be. Messy. Complicated. But beautiful. When you let it be. 2 years later. University of Miami. Graduation ceremony. Bright sun. Impossible blue sky. Families celebrating. Camera flashes, hugs, happy tears. And among hundreds of graduates, Isabella Cruz. 20 and 30 years old now. Graduation gown, cap and mortarboard, diploma in hand, BA in English, with honors. And beside her, Mateo, 13 years old. All grown up, proud, holding flowers he'd saved for months to buy. You did it, Isa, he whispered. His voice was emotional. You really did it. And she hugged him. Because yes, she had done it. Not alone, never alone, but done it all the same. Camilla was in the stands, screaming, taking pictures, crying openly, unashamed, because she'd seen the entire journey. She'd held Isabella through the bad days, celebrated her through the good ones, been a sister, mother, friend, everything. And now she saw results. She saw transformation. She saw a dream come true, and it was worth every tear, every worry, every moment of doubt. It was worth it all. Dr. Santos was there too, discreet but present, as always, watching another life transformed, another dream restored, and feeling deep satisfaction in work that truly mattered, that changed trajectories, not just numbers in a bank account, across campus, in a modest office. Ethan Valdez worked, not in a Brickell skyscraper, not in a luxury penthouse, but in a shared space in Coral Gables, a small empire, but focused, ethical, deliberate. He had lost a lot in the wars of the last 2 years. Investors, contracts, status in elite circles. But I earn more. Peaceful sleep, a clear conscience, the satisfaction of looking in the mirror and liking what he saw. And today was a special day. Not for him, but for someone who had changed his life, and he wanted to make his mark, not with his presence, but with his gesture. A delivery man arrived on campus shortly after the ceremony. He searched, he found it. Isabella Cruz. He delivered an envelope, not heavy, not extravagant, just a letter, and inside, words. Dear Isabella, congratulations on your graduation. You deserve every honor, every recognition, every joy of this day. And you deserve it because you fought, because you didn't give up, because you believed, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I'm not there. On purpose. Because this is your day. Not mine, not ours, yours. But I wanted you to know, I'm proud. Not as someone who helped, but as someone who had the privilege of witnessing. Thank you for everything you taught me. Keep building bridges. The world needs them. And you are a master. With admiration, Ethan. Isabella read it. Once, twice, tear-eyed, but smiling, because it was perfect. He had understood. He had given space. He had honored without invading. He had acknowledged without possessing. And she kept the letter, along with the diploma, along with Mateo's flowers, along with all the memories of her journey. The good, the bad, the transformative, because everything mattered. Everything had a place. Everything had contributed to who she was now. A grown woman, a strong woman, a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. Never again. That night, Isabella and Mateo returned to their apartment in Little Havana. Same apartment, same building, because change wasn't urgent. Roots mattered. But there were changes, new photos on the walls, a framed diploma waiting to be hung, job offers piled on the coffee table, the future, tangible, real. Mateo made dinner. He had learned. He had grown. He was no longer a child needing constant care. He was a young man, a partner, a friend, and they ate together, talking about the day, about the future, about possibilities. And it was good. It was family, small, unconventional, but real and strong, stronger than any storm. After dinner, Isabella went to her small balcony. She looked out over Miami at night, lights flashing, life happening, and she thought about everything, about everyone, about the impossible journey she had completed. And she pulled out her phone, not to call, not to text, just to look, at saved contacts, at names that represented chapters. And she stopped at one, Ethan Valdez. She considered deleting it, closing the chapter completely. But no, she let it go. Because it wasn't about him. It was about her. About recognizing that people come into our lives, even in terrible ways, and sometimes they make us better. Not because they're heroes, but because they're human, flawed, capable of growth, as everyone is, when they choose. Across the city, Ethan was on the balcony too, smaller than he had been, simpler, but honest. He looked at the same sky, the same stars, and he thought of Isabella, not with regret, not with desire, but with gratitude, for being a mirror when he needed it, for being a teacher when he resisted, for being human when he forgot to be. And he smiled, because he had lost his empire. But he had gained his soul, and it wasn't a bad exchange. It wasn't a bad exchange at all. And he would continue building, smaller, slower, but better, always better, because she had shown him the way, and he would honor her every day, in every decision, in every choice, dignity over profit, humanity over power, always, forever. And somewhere between these two balconies, between these two lives that touched briefly but profoundly, the ocean continued, waves crashing, retreating, crashing again, eternal, patient, teaching a lesson they both had learned. That impact matters more than force. That persistence overcomes arrogance. That respect isn't demanded. It's offered and received, when deserved. And Isabella had deserved it, always deserved it. And Ethan had learned, finally learned. And Miami slept, dreamed, breathed, waiting for a new day. Where stories like this, stories of collisions, transformations, imperfect redemptions, would continue to happen, because life is this, messy, complicated, painful, but also full of possibilities, of second chances, of opportunities to be better. If you choose, if you fight, if you believe, that dignity is priceless, that respect is a right, not a favor, and that oceans, even oceans of differences, can learn to speak when we listen, really listen, with open hearts and guarded pride and humanity exposed, vulnerable, but real, always, deliciously, perfectly real. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like and share. Remember, respect costs nothing and is worth more than any fortune. It doesn't matter where you come from or where you are now. What matters is who you choose to be. Every day, in every decision, choose dignity, choose respect, choose humanity, because in the end, that's all that truly matters. It's all that remains. Thank you for following this journey. Until the next story.